Hello, and welcome to episode 40 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. Today is Sunday, January 10th, 2021. And I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, here with Dan through Zoom. Hey, Dad.
Hello, everybody. Good to
Good to
see you
see you.
today.
Yes, good to see you. And today, my dad is continuing his discussion from last week of Black history in Mecklenburg County. And this week, he is going to be talking about how the plantation houses of Mecklenburg County relate to that history. So, Dad, I'll let you get started.
Well, let me talk a little bit, sort of in general terms. You can see a building up there, which is the Hugh Torrence house and store. The oldest part of it was built 1799, 1800. But I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But I want to sort of deal with this in a little bit broader context because I just want everybody to understand where I'm coming from on this. As you know, and Mary Dana and I have said this so many times, that I see the job of the historic preservationist essentially to preserve artifacts. Our job is to provide those artifacts that can be interpreted in various ways. And something like this house, which, by the way, might legitimately be called the oldest store building, because this became a store in 1805. Some would say that this might be the oldest extant store building in North Carolina, and certainly it is among the very, very oldest. And there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that it is the oldest store building in Mecklenburg County. And it was run by a young fella. In fact, to look at my notes, because I can't remember all of this, for he was born in 1784. And he opened this store in 1805, so that would mean he was about 21 years old, unless my mathematics is incorrect. And of course, at that time, when he opened this store in 1805, it's an interesting building because if you look at the two-story part, the first story was a log house that was built about 1800, 1799. And it was built by James Torrance's father. The man who ran this store, his name was James Torrance. And by the way, when you deal with people's names back in the early 1800s, they weren't nearly as careful about how they spell their names as people are today, because they didn't have to worry about Social Security cards and draft cards and, all that kind of stuff. So they just change it. And yet it'll drive you nuts with this family, because some of them spelled it Torrance. Some of them spelled it Torrance. Some of them spelled it Torrence. So Torrance. It'll drive you nuts, and I'm not going to worry about that. The name of James's father was Hugh Torrence. And let me give you just the facts. He was Scots-Irish. Now, I think all of us know, or we should know, I'm looking back at some notes here. Yeah, I got it. As you know, the Scots-Irish got their name because they were Scots who were transported to Ireland. Now, that's where Scots-Irish comes from. And these people were essentially sent to Ireland in order to bring the Protestant denomination to an otherwise overwhelmingly Catholic country. And they were sent there by James the First. I think I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again. That's the same James the First who ordered a new translation of the Bible in English that everybody calls the,
The
King
King
James
James version.
version of the Bible. So, now, these people had always been basically very poor. They were Presbyterians, but they were very, very poor. Not only were they very, very poor, but they also had been discriminated against by the English. And largely the Scots Irish began migrate. They went to Ireland in the early 1600s. And by the way, they were sent to live on what were called plantations. Had nothing whatsoever to do with slavery whatsoever. It was just a term that was used for large tracts of land at that time. Even when they went to Northern Ireland, they remained very poor. And therefore, looking for a better life and increasingly discriminated against by the English, many of them in the 1700s, and I mean many, many of these Scots Irish, left Northern Ireland and came to the British colonies. And the place that most of them went initially to live was Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania was very tolerant toward different religious Christian denominations. And Hugh Torrence, who was the father of the man who opened this store, indeed did come to Pennsylvania about 1763. He was a young man at the time. He came, we believe, as an indentured servant. So you knew he was dirt poor. He couldn't even afford the money to get over here. He had to basically enter into a contract with someone to work for them so that he could get the money to get here. And he was, in essence, under the control of his employer during the contract term for being an indentured servant. So Hugh Torrence, James Torrance's daddy, Hugh Torrence, the man who came basically and bought the first land here along what we now know as Torrance Creek, which of course got its name from that family. He bought the land in 1799. He came south with his family to North Carolina. Before that, lived in Rowan County, but he came to Mecklenburg County about 1799. Okay, now, so therefore, let's just start out. I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong date. 1779,
Oh, okay.
not 1799. He came 1779 and bought the first 600 some odd acres of land in this part of Mecklenburg County. After he had worked off his indentured servant's contract, had gained some money on his own, he had first moved to Rowan County, where Salisbury is, and then in 1779, he came and bought this land that we're talking about. He first, of course, lived in a very humble log house, just like many of those. Please excuse my Facebook slop coming up.
I know you
Many of
need to turn
those
off your
who,
notifications.
I don't care. I'm not getting paid. Anyway, so don't think he started out being a wealthy man. Whatever he gained as a result of hard work. Now, when Hugh Torrence came here in 1779, the situation here was very much like what we saw with our dear friend Andrew Jackson. These were very violent times. This was when the Revolutionary War really raged into this part of the country. And he was very much caught up in that. In fact, he participated, he fought, he was a patriot. Now, being a good Scots-Irishman, you know how he felt about the English. He felt about the English just like Andrew Jackson felt about the English, because they had been the people who basically had forced the Scots to go to Northern Ireland and had essentially persecuted them even there, or discriminated against them there in Northern Ireland. So he was very much on the side of getting rid of British rule. He fought. He was a member of a light cavalry unit. Now, light cavalry meant that you rode to the battle on your horses, but you got off and fought on foot.
Mm.
Now, one of the battles that 1780, 1781, the war was ravaging this part of the country. If you go over to Lincolnton, North Carolina, right within the city bounds of Lincolnton today, is a battle of Ramsauer's Mill, which was one of many skirmishes and battles that occurred as the British and the Tories, the supporters of the king, moved into this part of the country. And indeed, Hugh Torrence fought there. Now, those are all facts, Mary Dana.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not telling you anything that's not a fact. He was on the side of the Patriots. He fought the Revolutionary War. He was there at the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill, which, by the way, was a very, very bloody engagement. In fact, the commander of his unit was killed in that battle. And even to make the story more interesting, Hugh Torrence ended up marrying the widow of the commander of the unit that he fought in at the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill.
Huh, that is interesting.
So this guy was a very enterprising fellow, okay? Now, the transforming event in terms of economics for this part of North Carolina, and we've touched upon this so many times, was the invention of the cotton gin. Because as we've noted before, the cotton gin for the first time gave the backcountry a valuable crop. In the case of the Carolinas, it was cotton. Because the cotton gin made it possible to get rid of the seed out of the cotton boll once it was picked much more efficiently. And you could produce much more cotton for market. So you could, for the first time, these poor, discriminated against, backwoods Scots-Irish could become wealthy. At least those who had the land, the pluck, the imagination, and the intensity to do so. Now, one of the things that was absolutely essential to be able to produce cotton, you had, first of all, you had to produce it in big volumes. And secondly, you had to have a lot of labor. Now, the way that I hear that cuckoo clock. Gosh, I love Dan's cuckoo clock. And no, don't turn it off. Love
There's
it.
two
Love
more. You'll hear the
it. Oh,
other
there are two
two
more. I
probably.
love cuckoo clocks. I love cuckoo clocks. Anyway, and I
Sorry.
know I'm going to run over, but I'll do this again. I want to set the stage, because Mary Dana, all I'm doing is telling you the facts.
Mm.
Now, one of the things, of course, there's a reality that comes out of this. They bought people. They bought people. Uh, Hugh Torrence would go to Charlotte because there was a place where you could buy slaves in Charlotte.
Do you know where it was?
It would have been right in the heart of town, but no, me and I don't know. Probably at the courthouse, but I on the grounds of the courthouse. But anyway, there's another. But I tell you, our clocks are going nuts. Anyway, by the time he died, and he died in let me look up here. Can't remember. He died in 1816.
Mm-hmm.
When he died in 1816, and by that time, by the way, he had built him another house just nearby. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And his son, James, was running the store in this house that we're looking at here. He had, according to our best estimates, he owned about 35 slaves. And therefore, he was becoming now a lot of people would ask, well, why didn't he get indentured servants? Well, quite frankly, the supply the supply wasn't nearly enough to meet the demand. In other words, the market and the number of people that were available to be indentured servants was not nearly sufficient to meet the need. So they did what they did. There's no doubt he had about 35 slaves. Now, this house is, as I say, it's really interesting because, and by the way, this is operated as a public historic site. It's the land is leased, and that's one of the great things. This is a tour I'm giving you. Let me tell you how you get here. Go up Interstate 77 from Charlotte to exit 23. Exit 23 on Interstate 77. When you come off the ramp, take Gilead Road, which is the road you come to, Gilead, turn left. Just keep going straight. And it'll be, I don't know, Marilyn, I think, Marilyn, I think it's about a mile,
Mm-hmm.
but don't hold me to that. You will come to this, and the address of this place is 8331 Gilead Road. So put 8331 Gilead Road, Huntersville, in your zippy do, whatever you use, and you can go there. Now let me say
Your GPS.
this tour that I'm taking you on will I think will be extraordinarily educational. Because interestingly enough, you have 3 public visitation sites on this tour. So, it can be really a wonderful thing. If you have people who come in from out of town and you want to take them, I mean, you take them to these places. They're, and the thing I would say, these are just artifacts. They were just built by people who were living at a particular time. And some people would say, well, why should you include these within African American history? Well, the reality is, Mary Dana, the vast majority of people who lived at these places were African American. The vast majority of African Americans who lived in Mecklenburg County before 1865 were enslaved people. Now, obviously, that's not something to celebrate, but it's just a fact. It's a
Well,
reality.
it's something that we don't want to forget.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that these places should be glorified, But I would say that these places need to be used to build interpretations that can form a narrative. That's all I'm saying. And by the way, just a little bit about the store. James Torrance, who was Hugh Torrance's son, man, the old man we've talked about, he dies in 1816. He leaves everything to his own son. He didn't have but one child, James, his only child. He left him all his acreage. And by the way, by the time James Torrance got through with his life, he owned about 3,000 acres, and James died in 1847. So James just sort of built on what his father did. Now, the way this store would operate, see, it was almost impossible to get fine manufactured goods. James Torrance would travel to Philadelphia. Now, can you imagine what it was like to travel to Philadelphia in the 1815, 16, 14, 13 period? I mean, this was an arduous journey. And, you know, he would buy tools, he would buy spices, he would buy finished goods, and he would bring them back in that extension that's off the back of the house.
Mm-hmm.
That was where the store was. The store was largely in this section back here. And I mean, it was a major place for people to come buy stuff. I mean, it was a major store building. Now, you know, I told you that James Torrance sort of prospered on his own. Now, I've shown you this before.
Mm-hmm.
This is just when you go and see the Hugh Torrance House and Store. Now, it's not open all the time. You'll need to check to see when the Hugh Torrance House and Store is open, but it is open to the public.
Do they have a website?
It does, and
Okay, just
you know,
Google it,
so
I
I
guess.
mean, you can go, you can, I'll you can go visit it. You can
Wait,
go
I have
see
a
it.
question. How do they
Yeah,
spell Torrance? Which way? Because you told me there were three ways. How do they spell Torrance?
Torrance.
Okay.
Torrance. Okay, now, how am I on time? Probably 30 minutes.
22 minutes.
Oh, I've
Well,
got time.
23.
Oh, I'm good.
Yeah, you're doing okay. Okay. That's Cedar
This
Grove
house,
next, right? Cedar Grove.
this is Cedar Grove. It's also known as the James G. Torrance House. In
Oh, a
other
different
words,
Torrance.
Hugh built this is the son that ran
Oh,
the store.
just ran the store. Oh, okay.
You remember I told you that Hugh built another house about 1800, 1799, 1800. It was located at the same spot. But in 1830, James tore that down and built this house. When I say he built that house, obviously the labor was provided by the slaves. Now, James Torrance, he owned 3,000 acres by the time he died in the 1840s. He's buried, by the way, at Hopewell Presbyterian Church, which we'll see and which is on this tour. Now, this has so many interesting dimensions to it. First of all, let me say this. This house, which was finished in 1833, it's all handmade. The brick was all made on the site. Now they imported some of the stuff to go in the house, but it's essentially made from the plantation itself. It is a magnificent plantation house. In fact, it is the only building in Mecklenburg County that has been judged to be by the state to have statewide significance. It is a a building which, in terms of its architecture, in terms of its refinement, is absolutely magnificent. No question about it. And I'll just show you, and I've shown you some of this before.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me tell you, there's an interesting thing going on. Now, understand, this is private property. This is not something that you go knock on the front door to go in. This is private property. But we are facing a major issue with this house now, in the sense that it is still owned by a direct descendant of Hugh Torrence
Mm-hmm.
and James Torrance. It's been owned by the same family ever since it was built. The land's been owned by the same family ever since Hugh Torrence bought it in 1779. I mean, that's how long we got here.
Oh.
But the family is ready to sell it. And one of the great questions is, what is going to be the best preservation solution for this? Now, I want to go back to say again that from my perspective, this is an absolutely irreplaceable artifact. It is something that is reflective of the time in which it existed. And one of the things that we're trying to think about, and individuals are trying to think about, is what is the best thing to do? Now, I know some people would say, well, this ought to be a public historic site too. Well, the realities of the economics are that public historic sites are never self-supporting.
Right.
But we are still thinking about what to do, still thinking about what to make. Now, let me tell you some things that are, just look at this place.
Is it lived in right now? I mean, is it livable? And
Well, it's livable, and certainly there are people that are occupying it, but it's definitely going to be sold. So it's not by any means an unoccupied structure, but we're going to have to find a new solution for it. Now, when you talk about interpretation, now this photograph that I'm showing you on the right, which was made on that staircase, everybody goes to that staircase to get the picture taken at Cedar Grove, obviously interprets the Old South in a sort of gone with the wind way. I mean, you can see these elegant ladies in their elegant dresses. Now, I think it would be fair to say that, particularly taking into account where we are today, that it's time to rethink the narrative. It's a time to have a more inclusive narrative.
a less
Because,
romanticized narrative, right?
well, I think absolutely, absolutely. Because here's the reality. James Torrance, who, by the way, was a very successful cotton farmer, who owned 3,000 acres of land, and who therefore wanted to grow as much possible cotton as he could. He owned upward of 140 slaves when he died in 1847.
That's a lot.
Now, I could go on and on about the plantation culture and where it came from. The thing that basically underlay it was economics. It was rationalized agriculture. In other words, what you were trying to do was to produce as great a volume of crop as you possibly could. And the model of the plantation that was used in the backcountry of the Carolinas was essentially taken from a model that had been developed in the tobacco plantations of Virginia. And that meant that you essentially had laborers who lived on the place, who were totally controlled by the owners, who worked as a collective. In other words, you did not have individual farming going on. You had farming that was done collectively because this allowed you to be able to produce the greatest volume of crop for shipment to the market. It was all about shipping cotton, primarily in the case of the Cedar Grove plantation to either Wilmington or to Charleston, Wilmington, North Carolina, or to Charleston, South Carolina. So I think one of the things that really causes many people to look at these plantations from maybe a somewhat skeptical viewpoint is not the fault of the house. It's just an artifact. But rather it's how that artifact has been interpreted. And, you know, I believe that having something like this right close to an interstate highway, coupled, of course, with an earlier plantation house, it's just a teaching tool. It's just a teaching tool, you know, and so that's my whole approach. I'm not here glorifying anything about the old South. I'm just saying that this is the way it was. And the house was built from money that James Torrance made under the agricultural system that fundamentally depended upon slavery. No question about it. Now, you've gone up Interstate 77 to exit 23. You've turned to the left, gone west, and you've gone to, as I told you before, if you'll just put into your computer 8331 Gilead Road. Okay? Now, I'm going to take you to another plantation house.
You've been talking 33 minutes.
All right. Well, I'm not going to finish this by any means, but I'll at least, I might be able to finish the next plantation house. Maybe, maybe not. You know, one of the family, most of the great plantation houses, not all, but most of the great plantation houses are in the northwest part of the county. There's Facebook again. Boogie, boogie, boogie. Well, let me show you. If you'll continue west on Gilead Road, in other words, you leave, you just keep going the same way that you came down Gilead Road from Interstate 77. Just keep going. Don't worry about the street names because it's going to change. Just keep going straight. Just keep going straight, believe me. And it's going to be 3 or 4 miles.
Why are most of the houses up there? Was the land particularly suited for agriculture up there?
Yeah,
or?
good bottomland along the river. See, close to the river. Now this is Ingleside. Now Ingleside, we're going to run into a family here. This is at 7225 Bud Henderson Road. That's BUDHENDERSON. 7225 Bud Henderson Road. But you get there, just keep going straight and you'll get to 7225 Bud Henderson Road.
Is this one open to the public?
No, it's very much a private home. In fact, I could go on and on about the story about this one. But this was built by a member of the Davidson family. It's much younger than Cedar Grove and certainly much more so than the Hugh Torrence house and store. We don't know exactly when this was built, but it was right before the Civil War. It was about 1860, very, very late. And this is what's known as the Italianate style. And the man who built this, his name was William Davidson. Now, Davidson's a big, big name. And he's the grandson of someone we're going to meet later. In fact, we're going to meet a grandson, a son, and the old man himself. But this was the grandson, Dr. John Davidson. This is called the Italianate style. It was a style that was very popular in the mid-1800s. It's very different from that sort of Greek revival style and the federal style that we saw with the earlier two houses that we looked at. This sort of squarish, broad soffit, bracket, hip roof, squarish type plantation house. It is magnificent. It's a magnificent building. And we have a wonderful new owner that's bought this house. The Landmarks Commission, one of the last things I did when I was with the Landmarks Commission was to start a process that ended up finding an absolutely wonderful owner of this house it is presently under restoration and it's going to be their home. So this is private property. You don't go drive up in the yard.
Don't knock on the door.
Don't knock on the door. Go slowly by. The only one so far that I've shown you that you can go in is the Hugh Torrence house and store. That one you can go in. Now, Mary Dana, look at this. Look at this. Look at this sucker. I mean, I'm not going to show this video, but just look at it.
Was it also built by slaves?
Oh, sure. It was exact. In fact, I first went to this house. It would have been in the mid-1970s. It was right after I became the director of the Historic Landmarks Commission. And the slave quarters were still there directly across Bud Henderson Road. They've all been destroyed now. In fact, there's a development. And one thing I wanted to mention to you about Cedar Grove, which I failed to do, some of the foundations of the slave houses still exist on that property. Not the houses themselves, but the foundations do. Well, Mary Dana, I mean, we've got a minute or two. Where are we? About 35, 36 minutes?
38 minutes. I wanted to know though, on this one and also at Cedar Grove, are there slave cemeteries there?
You know, no, they were buried. They are not. And that's a very good question, Mary Dana. I don't know. I'm sure that many of them were buried at Hopewell Presbyterian Church, which was the church that they went to. And they don't know where their cemetery. They don't have knowledge of where, to my best knowledge, they don't have knowledge of where they are. So the answer is no. I can't answer that question. I simply don't have any idea. Well, what's your thought about? I mean, I had one person, believe it or not, who took me to task for the fact that I told people I was going to be showing the plantation houses.
Mm-hmm.
And he immediately labeled me as a white supremacist because I was showing these plantation houses. And of course,
on Facebook?
Yeah. And, you know, good grief, give me a break.
Well, I know you're not.
They're just artifacts. They're just artifacts.
Well, I think it's what you said is interpretation is really important. That if, like you said, that you're not trying to glorify anything or, make light of anything or romanticize anything. You're just trying to give the information because it's important that we don't forget and just gloss over it and just say, sweep it under the rug like it never happened. Because,
And
it's
there's
important to
another
remember that we
after,
had slavery.
yeah, and there's another side to it too. It is that you have to admire the workmanship,
Mhm.
the craftsmanship that was used in building these houses. And the fact of the matter is that slaves provided the great majority of the labor for the construction of all these plantations.
Well, it's like you said, a lot of people lived and died there and shouldn't be forgotten.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. And I would say that if you're going to have an inclusive narrative, which I definitely believe in, if you're going to have an inclusive narrative, you've got to include this.
Well, and that's why I asked about the slave cemeteries, because I'm always wanting to know where those are so that they're not forgotten. And that's why
Well,
we did that podcast on the
there
slave
is a
cemeteries.
slave cemetery that's on the tour.
Oh, good. Okay.
So we're going to see that. But I really would say, just in closing, if you get somebody who visits from out of town, and they say, what am I going to do? What am I going to show them? Get them in a car, go up Interstate 77 to exit 23. And if you're coming from Charlotte, you take a left. If you're coming south toward Charlotte and you get to exit 23 on Interstate 77, you take a right. And just go down Gilead Road. And what I'm going to do next time is show you, hopefully, the remainder of the places on the tour. But we'll just have to end that for today.
Okay. Well, thanks, Dad. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. And we hope you learned a lot and that you will join us next time. Thanks, Dad.
Absolutely. And I hope everybody has a wonderful week. Gosh, better than last week.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye.
Bye.